3 men were left alone on a remote island in the Atlantic. 11 days later, a ship arrived to relieve them. The lighthouse was still standing. The equipment was still there. But all 3 men had vanished. And more than a century later, no one can say with certainty what happened to them. Far off the western coast of Scotland lies a small group of islands known as the Flannan Isles. The largest is Eilean Mòr. Even today, it feels isolated. But in 1900, the isolation was far more extreme. There were no radios connecting the lighthouse to the mainland. No helicopters. No instant weather forecasts. Only the sea separated the lighthouse keepers from the rest of the world. The lighthouse itself had only recently entered service. Its purpose was simple: guide ships through dangerous waters surrounding Scotland's western islands. But maintaining that light required men to live in one of the loneliest places imaginable. And in December 1900, 3 men were stationed there. The principal keeper was James Ducat. He was an experienced lighthouse keeper who had spent years working at different stations. Alongside him was assistant keeper Thomas Marshall. The 3rd man was Donald McArthur, an occasional keeper temporarily replacing another man who was away on sick leave. Their job demanded discipline. The lamp had to be maintained. The machinery had to be cleaned. Weather observations had to be recorded. And every night the light had to shine across the Atlantic. For the men stationed there, routines mattered. Because on Eilean Mòr, there was nobody else to rely on. Then, on December 15th, something changed. Around midnight on December 15th, a passing steamship sailed near the Flannan Isles. Its crew noticed something unusual. The lighthouse light could not be seen. That observation was later reported when the ship reached port. But the information did not reach the lighthouse authorities in time. And so, no immediate rescue mission was launched. Back on Eilean Mòr, whatever had happened remained unknown. Days passed. From the mainland, the lighthouse light was also reportedly absent. Yet there was still no direct way to contact the men. The island remained silent. Finally, on December 26th, the lighthouse tender Hesperus approached Eilean Mòr for a routine relief visit. The crew expected to see the keepers waiting for them. Instead, they saw no one. The ship sounded its horn. Nothing. A rocket was fired to attract attention. Still nothing. Joseph Mòr, the relieving lighthouse keeper, was sent ashore. He climbed from the landing place toward the lighthouse. The higher he went, the stranger the silence must have felt. No keeper appeared. No one answered him. Mòr reached the station. And there, he discovered that all 3 men were gone. What Mòr found inside made the disappearance even more unsettling. The lighthouse had not been abandoned in chaos. The lamps had been prepared. The lens and machinery had been cleaned. The kitchen had been tidied. The work expected during the morning appeared to have been completed. It looked as though the men had been following their normal routine. And then, some time later, they had simply left. 2 sets of outdoor clothing were missing. That detail suggested that at least 2 of the men had deliberately prepared to go outside. But none of them were anywhere on the island. Mòr searched. Other members of the Hesperus crew joined him. Still, there was no trace of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, or Donald McArthur. Investigators began reconstructing the final days from the records left behind. The last completed entries in the keeper's log were dated December 13th. But that did not mean the men disappeared on that day. Information for December 14th and observations from the morning of December 15th had been written on a slate, ready to be transferred into the official log. The lamp had been cleaned. Its fuel supply had been prepared. The morning's work appeared finished. That evidence pointed toward one important conclusion. The 3 keepers were probably still alive and working normally during the morning of December 15th. Whatever happened to them likely happened later that day. And investigators soon found something outside that offered a possible explanation. At the western landing area, there were signs of extraordinary violence from the sea. Iron railings had been displaced and twisted. Equipment near the landing had been damaged. A large block of stone had been moved from its position. Even more striking was the disappearance of a life buoy that had been secured near the path. The sea appeared to have reached with enormous force into an area more than 100 feet above sea level. This changed the investigation. Perhaps the men had noticed damage near the landing. Perhaps equipment was in danger of being swept away. And perhaps they had gone outside to secure it. Their clothing offered another clue. Investigators believed that Ducat and Marshall had been wearing equipment normally used when going down toward the landing areas. Everything seemed to point toward the sea. Robert Muirhead, the superintendent who investigated the disappearance, eventually proposed the explanation that remains the most accepted. The keepers may have gone toward the western landing during dangerous weather. Perhaps one man went first. Perhaps another followed to help. At some point, all three ended up near the exposed coastline. Then an enormous wave, what investigators described as an unexpected large roller, may have struck the island. A wave powerful enough to damage heavy equipment and tear objects from their fittings. If the men were standing near the landing when it arrived, they may have had almost no warning. Within seconds, all three could have been swept into the Atlantic. Their bodies were never recovered. But there was still one troubling question. Why were all three men outside? A lighthouse station could not simply be left unattended without good reason. One keeper would normally remain responsible for the light. So why would three experienced men expose themselves to dangerous conditions at the same time? Maybe the situation outside appeared urgent. Maybe one keeper got into trouble and the others rushed out to help him. Or perhaps the weather changed faster than they expected. There is another possibility. The sequence of events may have been completely ordinary until one sudden accident turned it into a tragedy. More than a century of retelling has surrounded the case with dramatic details. Stories of strange log entries. Stories of supernatural forces. Stories of madness and murder. But the surviving official records do not require anything supernatural to explain what happened. They point towards something much simpler. And possibly much more terrifying. The sea. Over time, the Flannan Isle story became larger than the evidence itself. Poems, books, and later dramatizations helped transform the disappearance into one of Britain's most famous mysteries. Details were repeated so often that separating documented fact from legend became difficult. But the original records paint a more restrained picture. Three men completed their work. Something drew them toward the landing. Extreme sea damage was later discovered there. And the men were never seen again. There was no confirmed final message explaining their actions. No recovered bodies. No surviving eyewitness. Only the condition of the island and the records they left behind. Behind the mystery were three real people. James Ducat left behind a wife and children. Donald McArthur also left a family. Thomas Marshall left relatives who would never receive a definitive explanation of his final moments. Official records would eventually list the men as probably drowned. But probably is the word that has kept this story alive for more than a century. Because without bodies and without witnesses, certainty disappeared with them. Today, the lighthouse still stands on Eilean Mòr. The light that once required men to live on the island was eventually automated. But the events of December 1900 were never completely resolved. Maybe the official explanation is correct. Maybe one enormous wave took all three men in a matter of seconds. But we will probably never know exactly why all three walked out of that lighthouse, or what they saw in the final moments before they disappeared. 3 men. One isolated island. And a lighthouse left behind with nobody inside.